Welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. I did something tonight for the first time since, since 2015. And that would be watching an episode of The Flash live as it happened. I know, wild, right? I mean, it's not something that normally happens. Usually, if you follow this podcast and you've seen my continuation of what's going on and, coverage of Armageddon and all of that, you know that I usually watch it Thursday or Wednesday night, depending on how I'm feeling, because, Hawkeye and all of that. Now, this week, because of how packed my fucking schedule is today, this week, where I got tomorrow, I'm seeing Nightmare Alley a day early, so I'll be doing a review of that tomorrow night. Spider-Man No Way Home is coming out on Thursday, and then Friday, I might be seeing American Underdog, the movie about Kurt Warner, the football player. I figured that it would behoove me to watch this now, because I got enough shit going on without having to also watch, without having to also try and find a place for that in my schedule. It's fucking bizarre. Okay, anyway, so here we are. We are talking about The Flash Armageddon Part 5, the final part of Armageddon. And here's the thing. Number one, there is no reason why this event had to be 5 parts. I don't think that this 5th part was necessarily necessary, for that matter, because it doesn't scream to be something that needed to happen. Like, Part 5 is the same conundrum we've had multiple times before, notably in Season 2 when the Reverse Flash came back and was kind of hanging out and, Barry's timeline, and they caught him, and then they were like, we're just going to leave you in here and let the time wraiths get you. We're not going to put you back in your own time. We've caught you. You are done. You cannot kill my mother now. Yada, yada, yada. So that, is happening. And then Cisco starts to die, so they have to kill him. Now, here's the problem with this episode. I think that, putting the moral quandary of should they let the Reverse Flash die is an interesting one, but it would be more interesting if it wasn't a moral quandary we were dealing with multiple times over and having seen this episode multiple times already, where it's like, is it the right thing to do to let the villain die? Is it the right thing to do to kill the villain? What do we do? And I think in a case like this, we have a time-traveling, madman, maybe letting him die is the right thing to do in this case. I'm not totally against letting him die. There is a neat Shining reference, but that's at the end of the episode. What else was that I wanted to address with this episode? It's it's one of those things where we've seen this before, so why make this part 5 of the crossover? Which really, it's not a crossover. I hate that it was billed as a crossover, because it's really not. It's kind of a, it's basically an event. It is exactly how an event comic should feel, as you're reading it, where it's all of these other characters kind of show up for 1 or 2 little scenes, and that goes on. That said, I think Mia is ultimately the most wasted character in the Ryan Wilde is the most wasted character in the crossover, because Ryan doesn't know Barry, so she kind of gets thrown into the future timeline and doesn't quite get anything to do. And I think that, she gets to talk with, Iris and get some cool moments with Iris, but ultimately she's Batwoman very briefly, and even that's not that big a deal. Ryan Choi's also wasted. Really, it feels like we're just wasting characters at this point, just because, we have these characters and we feel like we can do it, and then fuck the Legends are off doing their own thing. It kind of feels a little weird in that regard. And I feel like there's definitely a methodology to go with in this, where this final part doesn't feel quite as, not quite shoehorned, but we don't, it feels like they didn't know where they were going. It feels like they kind of were well, we wrote ourselves into a corner after part 4, what do we do for part 5? It's okay, moral quandary, we'll bring back Mia, and we'll see what's going on. all for bringing back Mia. All this does is raise additional questions as to what the fuck is going on. Because I'm one of the people who was upset that Green Arrow and the Canaries was not picked up to series. I think that it should have been a no-brainer, considering the highest rated episode of that season was Green Arrow and the Canaries, and that includes the Crisis and the series finale. And I think that that's kind of a big, it should have been, picked up. But, this episode doesn't quite explain what's going on, and it kind of gives hope that they're going to continue telling this story. And they put Mia in the present day, so Mia's kind of hanging around in the present day. So it'd be interesting to see if Mia shows up in other shows. I like that they really laid that groundwork there where Mia could come back. I don't think it's likely that Mia's going to just, just fade into the background of the Arrowverse. Who else is there in this? I don't know, it just feels kind of weird that it's Despero, and that's the thing too, it's in a crossover ordinarily you'd have all the characters teaming up together to beat the bad guy, but they don't do that here because, what's it called, it's not really a crossover. But yeah, I think that, I think Armageddon is a fine event. I feel like what little bit it has, I feel like even the threads of we're just not gonna even the moral quandary around letting Thawne live doesn't quite land as nicely, considering that everything that's happened over the course of this show should have solidified this a little bit more, and it doesn't. Also, I like that. I think the strongest moment of the episode is definitely Caitlin facing off with Thawne. And telling Thawne how much he hurt her over the years and all that he did. And how Thawne tries to rub it in her face about how it's oh, and you never moved on. You could have. You just chose not to. I feel like that was, the way that scene is handled is just so great. And I feel like that's a great way to do it. I also like that they've mentioned a bunch of characters that they haven't really mentioned before, and since they've left. Where it's Ronnie was such a big part of the show for season 1, and then part of not even season 2, just season 1, and he was never referenced again after he died in season 2, or early season 2. Eddie almost never mentioned again, despite being engaged to Iris in season 1, and they both get little mentions, and I think that's a really strong way to do it. Again, bumpy, but not the worst. It's still better than Legends of Today, Legends of Yesterday, and I would say, but it's not fair to compare it to a crossover, because it's not really a crossover. And then they whammy, what's her name, Mia, and they gotta do Flash versus Arrow again. Ultimately, it's Mia could have not been there, and it would have worked just as well. They could have used anyone else, but I feel yeah, fuck it, we'll throw Mia in. Like I said, farewell tour. So we'll wrap up there for today, and we'll be back with our next thing tomorrow when we have Nightmare Alley. So until then, have a great rest of your week.